And now it's time for Mob Talk Radio with your host, Jeff Canarsie.
And welcome to Mob Talk Radio. This is the Q&A show. I am your host, Jeff Canarsie. It has been, needless to say, a very interesting week for a lot of different reasons. I wish I could totally go into it. I wish I could talk about it, but I can't. But needless to say, I think I'm going to leave this little cliffhanger, and I may bitch about this probably in the Carmine Persico show at the top of the thing. But I've been to court a million times in my life. Sometimes for good things, sometimes for not so good things. But probably the funniest thing that's ever happened to me in my life, and I've heard this once before, but it involves something different. But I'm sitting in court, and I'm watching my bulldog attorney do what he does. And naturally, when you're having an argument, another side gets to voice their opinion too. This person stands up in front of a federal judge and points at my attorney and says, he's in the Mafia. He said some other things, but I'm not going to get into that. And then he points at me and said, and that one over there, he's in the Mafia. He's in a crew. His whole family's in the Mafia. I need protection. Listen. I'm a fucking radio host. You know, I'm Italian and Irish. I went into this last week because people were like saying I wasn't Italian. I'm Italian. So don't get that twisted, right? I was going to give out personal information, but now I'm not going to. But anyway, the point is that I look more so Irish than I do anything. I act very Italian. But the thing is that you're going to stand up in a court of law and you're going to say I'm in a Mafia. To me, that's just funny. It's comical. I couldn't stop laughing. I thought it was the most hilarious thing in the world. Just shows the epitome of how far people are willing to go to make shit up because they're scared. That's the way it kind of goes. And so that was my week. Believe me, I wish I could get into a lot more details. But that's not why we're here today. Why we're here to do the Q&A, and we had over 300 submissions, and obviously I can't do 300 questions, otherwise we'd be here for 6 hours. You guys would never get the Carmine Persico show, which is coming next. I want you to check out a couple of things. The first thing is over on Twitter. You can find me at Real Mob Talk 7. You can find us on YouTube, Mob Talk Radio. You can find us over on Facebook. Type in Mob Talk Radio. Also, check out the True Crime page. It's run by my partner, Scott. He covers a little bit of mob stuff, serial killer stuff, true crime type of stuff. He is launching, or has launched a YouTube page or whatever. So please go and give him a click, a like, a subscribe. I am going to be participating with him and doing some projects with him on that side of it, but Mob Talk's not going to change. I'm always going to stick with what I know best, and this is what I know best. As well as that, I'm trying to think because there was something else. Yeah, you can definitely, we've got a massive blog that's getting ready to turn over 100,000 reads, so go ahead and check that out. You could probably go into Google search bar and type in Mob Talk Radio True Crime page blog or blogger, and that'll pull that up, and you can check out our articles. And we also put out something yesterday about Joey Merlino and the update on Philadelphia, which I was going to get into today, but it's really more of the same. So more or less, that's the extent of how you can follow us. Go ahead and share our stuff. Go ahead and subscribe. I did get a question that revolved around iTunes. I was with Wildfire Radio, and I don't want to get into everything that happened with that, just because, not that there's a legality issue, there really isn't, but they're refusing to take down previous shows that I did, which I own the copyrights to, and they have those over on YouTube, and they're collecting massive hits on those, but for some reason iTunes won't take them down so that I could put up all the new stuff with some of the old stuff. So I am trying to get around to doing iTunes. The problem is that's why I'm not doing it, because I don't want to have two Mob Talk pages, because they're going to say one is copyrighted, one isn't, and I don't want to get into a whole fucking thing with Apple over this. So I will be finding a way to do this. Hopefully Wildfire will take them down, and then I can kind of do my own thing. If not, there's a couple of other avenues that I'm definitely going to pursue. So with that, let's get right into the Q&A, because we got a lot of stuff to do today. Don't forget, Carmine the Snake Persico is coming up on a separate show, probably after this Q&A is released. So the first question we have is from Grant Pickering. Where do you see the Detroit family now? The Detroit mob family has really small numbers. They're obviously not the same as they were in the 1960s. It's believed somewhere between 40 and 60 members. I don't even think it's really that high. I still think that they're active. Back in the day, the Zarelli family was there. It's just, the thing is, in terms of today, the mob is very different in general. Your days of the guys sitting on the corner are over. The days of multiple social clubs are over. There are still some, especially here in New York and in Providence, Rhode Island. But as far as Detroit's, you got to look at the economy in Michigan. You got to look at the economy in Detroit. They have whole fucking neighborhoods for sale. So I think that whatever illegal rackets and criminality that is going on from that perspective, as far as Cosa Nostra goes, it's probably very limited at this point. I would think that if anything, that they have stuff to do with some Canadian stuff, probably narcotics coming in and over the border. But that's probably the extent of how powerful they were, or are, at least at this point. Moving on, Jeremiah Holland. What is left of the Patriarca crime family in Rhode Island? This sort of topic I know very, very well. Here's the thing. Providence keeps going back and forth to where their power base is going to be. From the 20s to like the 60s and 70s, the power base was in Providence. In the 80s, right after Junior Patriarca gets caught inducting members and he's off to prison, they sort of moved the power base to Boston. Then it goes from Boston back to Providence, Providence to Boston. So it's always gone back and forth. One of the problems that Providence does have is that typically what they do is, and this is post Ray Patriarca Sr., the boss usually is obviously on the north end of Boston. He operates out of there, and then he'll send his underboss to Providence to run Providence. Providence is a small state, so there's only so much. So usually they split the family up into two areas, which is mainly the north side of Boston and in Providence, typically Federal Hill, Lincoln, Rhode Island, and stuff like that. Currently, Carmen D'Annunzio, the cheese man, is the boss. The underboss is Matthew Guglielmetti Jr. Now, and then you have some other guys that are right underneath of that. Joe Achille is one of them, or Achille, excuse me. But the guy you're going to really watch is going to be Matthew Guglielmetti Jr. He reminds me a lot of Salvi Testa. He sort of runs things in Providence. He's young. He did a stint, but he's young. He's charismatic. Reminds me of sort of the Salvi Testa, or even a young Joey Merlino for that. But more so Salvi Testa. That's going to be interesting to watch. Carmen D'Annunzio is sort of gets the reins by proxy, just because of the dynamics in Providence. So as far as what's left of them, they still got guys there. They have Gambinos there. In Massachusetts, you get to Vermont, New Hampshire. You've got guys all around Worcester, Massachusetts. You got guys all over the place. But if you're asking me simply, is Providence as strong as it once was? Absolutely not. Providence will never be as strong as they were when Ray Patriarca Sr. was running the family. It's just a different sort of feel. They're still active. They're still there. But a lot of the problems that Providence continues to have is when the power base is in Providence, at least post-Patriarca Sr. and Jr., they can't stay off the radar. You would have to be from Providence. You would have to be from that area to kind of understand what I mean. But it's not like New York. Providence is the smallest state, so it's very hard to sit out in the open on Federal Hill and somebody not take notice of you. So they're not nearly as powerful as they were. They still have membership, but they're struggling like a lot of smaller crime families. I still think that they're well, and maybe there is even a good argument to say whether they're as structured as, say, the Cavalcantes in New Jersey. But I think they're smaller than New Jersey at this point. And so we'll see what comes of it. But definitely keep an eye on Matthew Guglielmetti Jr. He is the underboss. And I think at some point you're probably going to see some sort of power vacuum in Providence. It's just going to be a matter of time. I think that they could use an injection of youth and new leadership. But that's just me. That's my 2 cents. You can take that or leave that. Next question is from Ron Palacios. Who's running the Gambinos now? I am not going to answer that question. I do know for a fact who is. I know the leadership there. I, unfortunately, am not going to answer that question. The reason why I'm not going to answer that question, and particularly why, because I know what people are going to say, well, you're answering the Providence question. You're from there. You got no problem there. What's the problem with naming who's running the Gambinos? The problem, there really isn't a problem with that. I'm just choosing not to answer that question. If you want to know, I'll give you a hint how to find this answer. There are several web pages that have leadership charts out that are fairly reasonable and fairly believable. I also do leadership charts myself. If you go over to our blogger page, Mob Talk Radio True Crime page, Blogger, you will find, you just got to go through old posts, you will find the hierarchy of the crime families. Who's running things, who's in charge, underboss, boss, consigliere, soldiers, capos, etc. However, I will say, and I will be honest about it, that some of the information that I did put out was misdirected, and that's intentional. There are certain people I'm willing to talk about, certain people I'm not. It's not out of any friendships or anything crazy like that. It's just I have to do things a certain way. And so if you want to know, you can try. There's a couple of different web pages. American Mafia, I think, American Mafia News, Gangsters, BB. They all sort of have a layout of who's running things. And I believe that those for the most part are fairly accurate with a couple of different changes. And they came out with those, so it is updated. But that's probably where you're going to be able to find that. What I can tell you is Dominic Cephalou is not running the Gambinos. That's been reported everywhere. He is not. I know who is, and we're just not going to go there. Robert Wilkins. Well, let me come back to you, Robert. Okay, Matt first. I've heard you say Frank Sheeran was the highest-ranking non-Italian member, but what about Meyer Lansky? Well, there's a huge difference here. First of all, Frank Sheeran, it is believed that I'm going to sneeze. Hold on. Frank Sheeran was only Frank Sheeran was only high ranking because of the power that it was around him. Jimmy Hoffa, Russell Buffalino, et cetera, union laborers, Tony Provenzano. So Frank Sheeran had a lot of power because of what he did. He was a hitman. He took care of business for Hoffa, took care of business for Buffalino. So his real strength and power comes from other people. So as far as comparing him to Meyer Lansky, it's really not accurate to do that, only because Meyer Lansky was a boss. Meyer Lansky was effectively on the commission in many ways. Now, when I say that, there are going to be those that are going to say, no, he wasn't. When I say commission, I don't mean he was a sitting, ruling member. What I'm saying is that the mob commission did defer to him oftentimes for advice and stuff like that. Meyer Lansky was in control of an awful lot. He was the moneymaker for the mob in many, many ways. He was responsible for the casinos in Cuba, the Fountain Blue down in Florida. So from that perspective, Meyer Lansky carried a lot of weight and a lot of power. Now, there will be some that will make the argument that perhaps Meyer Lansky would not have had that power if he wasn't making that much money for the mob. I believe that to be the case. If Meyer Lansky couldn't make a dime, if Meyer Lansky didn't know how to scheme and make billions for the mob, I don't think that they would have had as much use for him. I certainly don't think that the mob would have tolerated some of the backstabbing stuff that he actually did do. So, but Meyer Lansky's relationships went, all the way back to Lucky Luciano, went all the way back to Murder Inc. and all of that stuff. So it goes way, 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 way back. But the difference being is Sheeran was a soldier effectively, did what he was told to do, without any sort of buck in the system, without any sort of complaints. That's where Frank Sheeran got his power from. And Frank Sheeran was involved in some very, very historical things, and that's another reason why he was so high up. Most guys that are that high up often get killed, as we've seen with Johnny Roselli down in Tampa when they found him in Biscayne Bay. in an oil drum. He saw too much, knew too much, was involved in too much, and he had to go. Because Roselli was involved in Vegas, JFK, and the list just goes, CIA, and the Bay of Pigs invasion, and the list, and Fidel Castro, and the list goes on and on and on. But those are the differences. Lansky was a boss. Lansky could control many different things. Lansky could ask or say that this gets done, and it gets done because people did fear him. Take away his earning capacity and forget about it. I don't think the mob would have had a ton of use for Lansky, other than the fact that he was a huge money maker. Let's see. Next question. David Grady, do you think anyone believed Greg Scarpa was an informant? That's an interesting question. That's one that me and my lawyer kind of digest all the time. It's fun to talk about Greg Scarpa. Here's the thing. Whether or not people believed Greg Scarpa was an informant or not really doesn't fucking matter at the end of the day. Let me explain why. Greg Scarpa would kill you. Greg Scarpa was a murderer. Greg Scarpa was a tough guy. Greg Scarpa was not the type of guy, and we're going to talk about him a little bit in the Carmine Persico show that we do today. Greg Scarpa was Machiavellian. Yes, he was an informant. He was treacherous. But here's the thing. You can say all day long, Greg's a rat, Greg's a rat, Greg's a rat. And there were guys that did assume that Greg Scarpa was an informant. And the person that even made an accusation got his eyes blown out of the front of his fucking head. So very early on, when people said that Scarpa could potentially be an informant, he handled business. And when you handle business like that, most times people who want to make that accusation won't, because they fear for their lives if they do. And Scarpa wouldn't have fucked around. He'd have just simply had you killed. He couldn't let that get out. So while it's a great question, and it's fun to kind of play around and answer that in different ways, I don't think it matters whether anybody believed it or not, because they were all petrified of Scarpa. And Scarpa was able to sort of play Carmine Persico to a T. And we'll get into that later on today. But I don't think it really matters what people thought. The minute that they offered that vocally, he was going to kill them. Okay, so next question. John LaRue. That's a great name. I wonder if this is a real name, Johnny LaRue. I'm a big John Candy fan. So, do you think the Detroit family had anything to do with the disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa? Absolutely not. Jimmy Hoffa, I mean, I'm sure to some extent they were aware of what went on, but that was totally not a Detroit mob family operation. That was essentially Frank Sheeran is the one that shot Jimmy Hoffa in the back of the head, came on orders of Russell Buffalino and Tony Provenzano. So the idea that this came from Detroit, not feasible. They may have had knowledge of it, or at least some knowledge of it to some extent. But this was definitely not a Detroit mob family operation. This was something where Jimmy Hoffa had grown too big for his britches, was threatening to effectively out the Mafia because he wanted to run for labor union boss again, Teamsters boss, and they'd had enough of Hoffa. He wouldn't listen, so he says, well, if you don't let me do this, I'm going to start talking. So they said, okay, you got to go. And that's sort of what happened to Jimmy Hoffa at the end of the day. And the reason why you're never going to find his body is because his body was incinerated at a mortuary about 2 blocks from the house he was killed in suburban Michigan. So, there you go with that. David Fitzgerald. Was Meyer Lansky an earner or a hitter? I've heard conflicting accounts. Did Frank Costello whack anybody? Meyer Lansky was an earner. Meyer Lansky, to my knowledge, made his bones at a very early age. But his preference was to sort of be a peacemaker. His preference was to be more of an earner. So if I had to give you an honest answer here, he was more of an earner than a hitter. He had Murder Inc. to do his bidding. He had Hitmen to do his bidding. He didn't need to be a hitter. In his youth, he was, because that was just the reality of that time period. As far as Frank Costello, of course Frank Costello killed someone. Frank Costello at a young age was involved with the Young Turks, and they were notorious for murder for hire. So the idea that Frank Costello didn't have his hand in any murder is absolutely ridiculous. But as a leader, he chose to sort of be a little bit different about things. But at the end of the day, the answer is he was sort of both, but he was more of an earner than he ever was really anything else. Patrick McCulloch. Your take on John Dillinger, his escape from Crown Point Jail. Now, while this may not be a Mafia-related question, we do take all questions here, and I'll be happy to sort of give my opinion on John Dillinger's escape. If you're unfamiliar, obviously John Dillinger was a big famous bank robber, but effectively what happened in this instance and what Patrick is talking about is when John Dillinger escaped from prison, county jail. Dillinger was effectively waiting trial, which was scheduled for, I think, March 12th, because back in January 1934, there was an armed robbery at the First National Bank of East Chicago. And when that happened, he was effectively a veteran police officer by the name of William Patrick O'Malley was killed. And Dillinger allegedly walked away with $20,000. So he's awaiting trial for robbery, armed robbery, for killing a veteran police officer, and effectively they, at least according to reports, Dillinger and his crew were able to kind of swipe $20,000 from this bank. Then on Saturday, March 3rd, 1934, Dillinger used a wooden fake pistol which he crafted from a razor blade, and effectively held up his jailers at gunpoint. Sort of locked him up, and then he takes Ernest Blunk, who was a sheriff's deputy, and a garage worker named Edward Seeger as hostages. He grabs 2 automatic weapons, steals a police car from the garage, and he drives over the county line where he drops Ernest Blunk and Edward Seeger. Now, if you're asking me how this was specifically done, I don't think what I'm going to say is really anything that anybody else probably hasn't surmised over the years. I think it's an inside job. The reason why I say that is, as crafty as Dillinger was, he was the most wanted list. He was a high-profile criminal. This jail, I'm not going to say was top-of-the-line jail or top-of-the-line security, but there was enough security in there to definitely keep Dillinger within a cell. Now, I know that there have been times where DAs and prosecution has sat and had lunch with Dillinger and sort of been friendly and stuff like that, because by all accounts, Dillinger was a very likable guy. However, in this case, I don't believe for 1 second that, first of all, he was sitting in a very open cell in county jail. This was not like a prison. If he's using a razor on a piece of wood, people are going to probably start questioning what the hell he's doing. He would have had a weapon. This was taken very seriously. So I think when you really add it up, I think at the end of the day, this was an inside job. I don't think it was a matter of taking a wooden pistol and sticking it out the bars and saying, yeah, you're going to open up the bars, you're going to take me out. I think he bribed somebody. And I think the most realistic of the two scenarios is that Ernest Blunk, who was a sheriff's deputy, and the garage worker Edward Seeger. I don't necessarily believe that Edward Seeger was involved. I think he was just an addition, but I really do think that Ernest Blunk, who was a sheriff's deputy, who was unharmed in the matter, I think he was in on it. And the reason why I say that is because Dillinger had no problem shooting somebody at a bank robbery, had no problem killing a cop. So realistically, he already knows if he's caught, he's going to prison for the rest of his life anyway, right? He's killed a cop. Those days, same thing as today. You kill a cop, that's what's going to happen to you. So it wouldn't be a stretch for me to actually try to pick his brain and say, well, why wouldn't he just kill this sheriff's deputy? He's out of the jail. Yes, I understand taking a hostage. That sort of makes sense because he is going to steal a police car. But he could have just as easily killed them both over the state line, and nothing much would have changed. He was still going to probably get the electric chair anyway. He was probably still going to have problems. But he also has $20,000 burning a hole in his pocket. And in those days, he could have just as easily turned around and offered them $1,000, $2,000, which would have been like 7 months, 8 months pay in the 30s, right? To just let me out, and I'll drop you over the state line, give you cash, my crew will meet me, give you cash, and it's over. Don't worry about it. You'll keep your job because I'm taking these automatic weapons, and you got a little extra cash in your pocket. Just keep your mouth shut. That's what I believe happened. I don't think for any second that this happened the way that it was described. I think it's a great story. But Dillinger is shot shortly, I believe, not long after this event. Dillinger is actually shot and killed coming out of a movie theater. So, the end of the day is we can go back and forth on Dillinger and who he was and what he did. But I really do believe at the end of the day that this was a setup job from the inside out. I think that people were paid off, and obviously it got Dillinger what he wanted. He was able to get out, but it didn't last long. So it they say crime doesn't pay. Apparently, in this case, it really didn't. But that's my opinion on Dillinger. I've always thought that about him, that was an inside job. But, who knows? I don't think you're ever truly going to know. Next question from Teflon Don Moo. Now, I like this name, Teflon Don Moo. Why wouldn't Skinny Joey's father stop the hit on Nicky Scarfo Jr. if he was once the underboss for Scarfo Sr.? Very basically, here's the reason why. Joey's dad was an underboss for Nicky Scarfo Sr., but Joey's dad liked to drink a lot too. Joey's dad was he was a tough guy, don't get me wrong. But Scarfo had this thing where if he suspected that you were trying to rise above him, or if he thought that you were trying to undermine him, he'd simply reduce you. And that's what really started the Scarfo-Merlino war, was that Scarfo took his father and made, he was an underboss, and he made him a soldier, not a captain. He bumped him all the way down to soldier. And that infuriated Nicky Scarfo's father. That infuriated Joey Merlino's father, and infuriated Joey Merlino. And since that day, Joey Merlino never liked Nicky Scarfo Sr. And that's sort of why you saw the split when Ralph Natale came out, and he kind of took Joey Merlino and crew, and then you had John Stampa and his side of it. And that's essentially what this was. Scarfo sort of controlled Stampa. Stampa did what he wanted, don't get me wrong, but Scarfo was sort of leading the directions from prison there. But that's exactly why Joey's father didn't stop it, simply because Nicky Scarfo had fucked him. He had bumped him down from an underboss to a street soldier for really no reason other than just some drama and stupid shit. And Merlino's dad wasn't going to get involved in it. Fuck Nicky Scarfo. That was just sort of the opinion, and that's exactly why that happened. As far as Nicky Scarfo Jr. getting shot with a MAC-10 at Dante Luigi's, that was to silence Nicky Scarfo Sr. That was to show Nicky Scarfo Sr. that your kid's touchable, you're done, you're in Atlanta Federal Penitentiary, you don't have an opinion anymore, shut your fucking mouth, your expectancy or your role in this life is over with. And that's all that was. So, once again, the reason why Joey's father didn't get involved in it was because they had an issue with Scarfo because of what he did to Joey's dad. You get taken from an underboss, made a soldier, so you're reduced to absolutely fucking nothing after you've been second in command. And really all that was Scarfo trying to control who was rising and who wasn't. Obviously, we've seen how Scarfo has dealt with Salvi Testa. He thought Testa was getting too big for his britches. He tells Phil, hey, he's got to go, and we know the rest is history. Luis A. Marquez, who do you think controls the border with Mexico, the cartel or the mob? Obviously, I think the cartel does. I don't think the Mafia has any sort of fucking say-so in what happens in Mexico. We've talked about this on some other shows, but the big difference between, say, now and the 60s is there are drugs still floating through Canada from Corsica, from Italy, or if we can we can really go to Afghanistan, Italy, Corsica, France, through Canada. But the thing is that back in those days, manufacturing was always in Afghanistan, always in Italy, the opium fields and stuff like that. But what we're seeing now, especially with like groups like MS-13, the Sinaloa cartel, even the Juarez cartel, is they're manufacturing themselves now in Mexico. So they're not having to pay the extra cost for somebody to send it in. They're effectively making it right there themselves. As far as Pablo Escobar goes, he had affiliations with the Italian Mafia mainly and the American Mafia to some extent, but it was mainly the Sicilian mob in Italy who he dealt with certain respects. But as far as the Mexican border, that is totally controlled by MS-13, totally controlled by the Sinaloa cartel, the Juarez cartel. There's a ton of different cartels, obviously, but those really are the guys that control it. And the fact that they are manufacturing now makes it so much easier for them. So the idea that the mob could even control that, I don't buy it. Now, if you're talking about, like, if you move north, As far as like Canada, then that's a totally different story. But that's pretty much that. All right, next question. Fernando Gabriel, was Meyer Lansky involved in narcotics? Of course he was. Every mob guy that had any sort of leadership role was involved in narcotics. Meyer Lansky was at the meeting in 1960, which I believe was between Lucky Luciano, Meyer Lansky, Carlo Gambino. Maybe I'm getting that wrong, but there was a big meeting, and they talked to Vito Genovese was there. There was a big meeting about drugs. Appalachian, the infamous meeting where all the mobsters went to Joe Barboza's house and the FBI raids. We've all heard about that a million times. You can look that up yourself. That was essentially, that meeting involved drugs too. More or less, the mob, Lucky Luciano and others, felt like the American Mafia was taking a huge risk by trafficking drugs. It wasn't so much the profits that bothered them, because they would take the profits all day long without a problem. The thing was, it brought too much heat, and you would do too much time. So they sort of brokered a deal, and Meyer Lansky was involved in it, that they would effectively make a deal with the Sicilian mob in Sicily. And effectively, the agreement was, you can do hits for us, you can work for us, you can have our protection, and you can have a part of our rackets, you can have a part of our labor racketeering. But the thing is that we want you to import the coke, we want you to import the heroin, we want you to bring it over the border. And that's effectively what it was. Lansky signed off on it, obviously, because he had a lot of power at the time. And what they were doing with a lot of profits, too, is buying up property in Vegas, casinos, and stuff like that. So they were laundering the dirty money. But the truth is, yes, Meyer Lansky was very, very, very involved in narcotics. The idea that he was some feeble-minded, peaceful guy is absolutely ridiculous. And that's just the absolute truth. Okay. Eric Madero. Is it true Nicky Scarfo shoved a horse off a cliff? Absolutely. You probably heard that from Tommy Del Giorno, which is a hilarious story, and I did a lot of research because I've known that for years. But yes, and if you don't know the story, Nicky Scarfo was essentially riding a horse down in Florida. He had a house down there, and apparently they were riding horses on the beach or something, which is kind of hysterical even in and of itself. And apparently there was sort of like this little cliff thing they went to, and the horse bucked Nicky Scarfo off the, the horse bucks Nicky Scarfo off his back, and Nicky Scarfo is so enraged about it that the horse did it intentionally. The horse doesn't like me. The horse is a rat, and he effectively has this horse taken to the top of this cliff and fucking essentially throws the horse off the cliff to his death. Now, while I'm an animal lover, I also laugh my ass off at that story. I don't know why it's funny to me. It just sort of is. Okay, Johnny LaRue has got another question here. The Detroit partnership supposedly had upwards of 5 to 6 members with college degrees. Do you think this gave them a good advantage over other mobsters? Absolutely not. I don't think a college degree changes much. They say that the best educations in the world you're ever going to get is a street education and a book education. I'm a firm believer in education. I think it's important, but I'm going to tell you something. You can tell me how to break down formulas all day long, but if you can't protect yourself walking 6 blocks in Bed-Stuy or Harlem, or some of these other areas, or even parts of the Bronx, if you're not intelligent enough to see your surroundings, then to me, I'd rather have a street education. That's just me, but I have both, luckily, and but I don't think that makes them any smarter or more intelligent. As we've seen in a lot of things, and you will hear it later today in the Carmine Persico, when he defends himself at trial, is that he was highly intelligent and didn't stay in school very long. So the idea that school or a degree would somehow make you give you an advantage over everybody else is absolute bullshit. I don't think that really changes a whole lot. Have you ever seen any other members of any other criminal organization graduate from college? There's a lot of different people. There's a lot of people that graduate college and go to a street life out of proxy or out of family obligation, family responsibility. Somebody in the family gets sick and they bump and grind on the streets. That's just reality. But I don't really think that changes the narrative. Who killed Who killed Big Jim Colosimo, Capone or Frankie Yale? That was a Frankie Yale move. You can obviously look that up. There's a lot of articles about that. But that was a Frankie Yale move. And eventually that would get Frankie Yale whacked. But that's that. Let's see. Next question. This is from somebody who did not want their name printed for whatever reason, so we're going to call this Captain Anonymous. Do you think Paul Castellano would have had a more positive impact for the family in a different role other than boss? He wasn't a street guy, but I'm sure being a businessman brought many qualities to the family. I would agree with that. I think Paul, he was a hypocrite in many ways, and a lot of people don't like me saying this, but he was a hypocrite in many, many ways, and I think he would have been really good as like the Tom Hagen character from The Godfather. I really do. I think the guy should have probably been a lawyer. He wasn't a gangster. He wasn't a thug. Somebody did make an argument with me that how dare I say anything about Paul Castellano because he got arrested one time and didn't tell. Well, okay, well, the person that said this, obviously, I knew what they were talking about. He got arrested once, okay, and him and his dipshit little buddies tried to rob a house and got caught. They were so stupid and how they got caught. But what Paul did do was he refused to acknowledge who else he was with, who else was in the car, and he took a pinch and he got out. That effectively got him his button. But really, that doesn't signify to me that somebody's brave. It doesn't signify to me, come on, they're robbing an old lady's house for Christ's sake. You know what I mean? That's anyway. But the point is that I think Paul would have been good in the business aspects of organized crime, and even more. I can prove that Carlo Gambino at one point had Anello Della Croce and Paul Castellano effectively sharing underboss duties, and he assigned Paul the labor racketeering, the construction, the garbage and cement hauling, janitorial. He had him covering all the white-collar stuff, and then on the flip side of that, he's got Neil Della Croce doing all the nasty gangsta shit. And so that should tell you something about the character of Paul, and it also proves my point that Carlo Gambino knew that Paul was not capable of doing what needed to be done as far as the grimier side of that lifestyle. Paul was a smart guy, a business guy, a Purdue chicken guy. He wasn't a gangster. And I think Carlo knew that, but I think that Carlo allowed him to take over because he trusted Paul. There's a lot to say about trust, but obviously we know what happened to Paul Castellano in the end. But I do think if he had had a different role and wasn't maybe a captain, and never higher than that, maybe even an underboss, I think that would have been acceptable, but I think that he went way too high for what he was designed and built for. And that's just my opinion. You can love me or hate me, send me your threats, but that's just my opinion. Jason Russell, who do you think killed Sam Giancana? Butch, Tony, or both? I think it was definitely Tony Spilatro. The reason being is you had to be really, 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 really close to get in. You know, Tony Spilatro learned a lot from a lot of different people. I definitely think it's Tony Spilatro. Every resource, every person that I've talked to that has, we'll say, somewhat intimate knowledge of this sort of thing has said that Tony Spilatro, hands down, had definitely involved in that. Can I say for certain? Absolutely not. However, when you fast forward a couple of years and Tony Spilatro gets killed, there's a reason for it, multiple reasons for it, believe it or not. And from my sources, everyone has told me that Tony Spilatro was the one that got that, he got that handed to him on a silver platter. So, Tony Spilatro also killed Sam DiStefano as well. So, JJ, is it true that Sammy the Bull, let me rephrase this. Is it true that rat, Sammy Gravano, said he never ratted on Gas Pipe because he knew Gas Pipe would go after his family? I, honest to God, really don't know if he said that. I don't know if he said that. I don't know if that's in court transcripts. He might have said that. But here's my thing. First of all, Sammy the Bull, and I don't like talking about this guy, but I will suffice to say this. Sammy the Bull, first of all, isn't going to say he was scared of anybody. So if you take it on its face value, I don't think he would have ever said that. I don't think he would have ever said that publicly. He has to be a tough guy, has to be recognized as a tough guy, a murderer, this, that, and the third. So for him to come out and out say he was scared of somebody, it's just not going to happen. That's why I don't buy it. However, if it was said in the context that he sort of said it to somebody else, I would buy it. I think Gas Pipe, not that I'm trying to say that one is more deadly than the other because they were both murderers. Believe it or not, they both killed innocent people. Sort of the same, cut from the same cloth, if you will. But would Gaspipe have killed his whole family? Absolutely. I think that's certifiable. I don't think there's any way to get around that. I think that's the very truth of the matter. But do I think that Gravano said that? No, I don't. He might have whispered it to somebody, but there's no way he would have ever said that publicly because it makes him look like a pussy, which he is, but it would have made him look like a pussy times 10. And if anybody wants to debate me on why I think Sammy Gravano, why I put that name on him, then you can by all means come at me because I'm not going to tolerate someone who kills an innocent child, call them a tough guy. Not a tough guy. And I don't want to get in that rabbit trail. We've talked about that enough. Okay, next question. Eric Madero again, and this is a good one. What's your opinion on the Nat Geo doc Inside the American Mafia? Do you feel like they left out a lot? Is some of the stuff 100% accurate? For example, on the John Gotti episode, an informant named Fat Sal says that Gotti wanted another puppet, so he pumped Vic Arena to tell Junior he's no longer boss of the family. This suggests the thought that maybe Gotti sparked some tensions in the Colombo War. Believe it or not, this is going to be a part of the Carmine Persico show I do today. And so to answer it, first of all, a lot of these mob documentaries, right? They get a lot right, but they get a lot wrong. They don't understand the politics. They don't understand. Sometimes a guy gets clipped just because he gets clipped. It doesn't always have to be because he stole money or he's talking subversive or he could be a rat. Sometimes guys just get fucking killed to get fucking killed. And that's where a lot of these documentaries get it so completely wrong. They want to make it this big. And there was a meeting in a warehouse at 9 o'clock at night on a Sunday as the moon was rising, the bats were flying, and the werewolves were out. And there had to be a decision. Someone was stealing money. Who had to go? It's not always like that. Sometimes a guy's just a prick and the other guy wants him gone. So do they leave out a lot? Absolutely. I mean, how can you truly do a documentary and, keep it under time constraints and really tell the whole story? That, and here's the thing. A lot of these times, Nat Geo, hold on, I'm going to take a shot of coffee here. A lot of times these documentaries, and I'm not going to say it's anything recently, they go to these guys like your Jimmy Calandras, and I'm not knocking Jimmy Calandra, I'm just simply saying that they go to guys like him. They go to guys like Mikey Tits DiLeonardo. They go to guys, and Mikey's a little different than Jimmy Calandra, so let me just stick with Jimmy Calandra. Jimmy Calandra was a fucking nobody. He wants to be a somebody. He was around a very, very tough individual. His friend gets a little stupid, lays hands on Spiro, and Spiro kills him. I mean, it's as simple as that, right? So a lot of times they bring in these guys that hear things, not necessarily see things. Oh, we heard this. And somehow they go from being really an associate with no power, no secrets, to all of a sudden they were an underboss in 4 days. I heard Steve Sergio claim he was a capo, which was the most hilarious shit I've ever fucking heard. Because he's full of shit. He was a fucking nobody living off his father's coats. The coat straps or coattails. Alright, so here's the thing. When you see these guys, and I'm going to tell you what, one of the most honest rats I've ever seen is Tommy Del Giorno. Tommy Del Giorno pretty much tells it how it is. You know, all rats lie to begin with, but the thing is that Tommy Del Giorno is the closest thing. Him and Dominic Montiglio are the closest two things I've ever seen to two informants that tell the majority of the truth most of the time. But that's the problem with these documentaries, is that they're relying on guys who really aren't who they say they are. They don't really have any information. But what they do have that the average citizen doesn't have is they have street knowledge and street credibility, in the sense that they grew up around that life and they know how that life works. Billy Cutalo Jr. is the same kind of way. And unfortunately, I'm going to get into that a little bit today with Carmine Persico, because that's one of the big beefs towards the third Persico War, is when Wild Bill Cutalo is killed. But you know what? Here's the thing. And this is what I'm going to say, and then I'll finish answering the question, is that I have a real issue when the children of mob people stand up, cry about their fathers getting killed, when 9 times out of 10 their fathers killed other people too. So you're a hypocrite in that sense. There are differences and there are parameters and different scenarios for everything. But when Billy Jr. stands up and starts, I was going to get even with the Colombo crime family because of what they did to my father. Well, first of all, your father was talking subversive about the boss. Your father was trying to take over the Colombo crime family. That's just what happens. And his father killed I don't know how many people. So the idea that somehow the mob serves its purpose when you're getting whatever you want as a kid because your father's making money, and then all of a sudden they decide, your father's dangerous. Your father's trying to take over a family that doesn't belong to him. He's talking shit about Carmine Persico. You're going to get killed. I'm not saying that murder's right, but what I'm saying is from a street perspective, and I'm going to make this very clear, from a street perspective, when you open your mouth, when you talk subversive about somebody that runs a family, when you're secretly going behind the boss's back trying to gain power through your capos and other families for really no other reason than your own selfish needs, you're going to get whacked. You're going to get killed. And he did. And his son wants to cry the blues. I feel bad that his father died. I think that's a horrible thing for a son to go through. But guess what? If we're going to talk from a street mentality, the ends justify the means every single fucking time. So while I can appreciate his sadness, his grief, and his anger, I certainly do. He has a right to feel that way. He also sort of needs to acknowledge what his father did. And that seems to Karen Gravano's the same way. A lot of these people can't justify that other part of it. They can't say, well, my father probably did this, this, and this. I think Dina Melito was the only one that's ever said, well, you know what? If I find out that my father did those kind of things that you're telling me that he did, then I'm going to have to stop and reevaluate who my father was. That was at least the most honest answer I've ever heard in my life. Billy Jr. can't come up with that. Karen Gravano can't do that. So anyway, do I think that John Gotti effectively pumped Vic Arena up to tell Junior he's no longer boss of the family? I don't think Gotti really planted seeds like that. I don't think that, first of all, Gotti gave a shit about his family only. I don't think there was him and Carmine Persico had a beef way back for different reasons, and I may talk about that today, may not. They didn't like each other a whole lot. But although I will tell you a personal story about Carmine that he told me in a letter about John Gotti later on today. But I don't think Gotti sparked tensions, because really at the end of the day, you're going to find this out today, Greg Scarpa was really the shit disturber in that whole event. It wasn't so much John Gotti that got involved. Did John Gotti support one over the other? Of course he was going to support Vic Arena because he didn't like Persico at all. It was better for business for the Gambino crime family if the Colombos sort of got in line. Vic Arena and Gotti sort of had not a relationship, not a friendship, but a business understanding. So yes, it would have benefited the Gambino and would have benefited Gotti a little bit for there to be Arena in charge. But the problem is that the big player in this was Greg Scarpa. Greg Scarpa was playing all sides of the fence with the FBI, with Persico, and with Arena, got involved in everything, and he was the real shit disturber. He's the one that started all the trouble. You'll find that out later today. So the last question we have is James Guerrero. Is the Chicago outfit family structure the same as New York or similar? It's exactly the same. It doesn't really deviate much. The hierarchy is the same. The way they make the money is the same. The only difference is in New York there's 5 families. Chicago there's 1. If not, how do they differ? They don't really differ very much. You would be very hard pressed to see how they differ. I can tell you this. The one major difference between Chicago and New York is politics. When Frank Costello was alive, he really controlled the political machine, but more so Chicago. Chicago's always been deep into politics and always has controlled politics, and that's a very, very big difference. You would be hard-pressed, especially in the 60s, to say that New York was stronger than Chicago. I think going back from like late 52 to like 69 or 68, I really think Chicago had the power. They certainly had the fucking numbers, and they had the political machine going. Sinatra, the Kennedys, Giancana, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas Costello, back in the day, had, politicians, City Hall, and stuff like that. So Chicago really was a political powerhouse back in the day. Not so much anymore, but I think that's one of the major differences. Chicago really knows how to grind the political machine. So, with all that being said, we've reached the end of the Q&A. I appreciate everybody for submitting questions. If I didn't get to yours, Robert Wilkins, I know I didn't get to yours. I apologize. I'll message you my answer. We talk daily anyway. But I wanted to thank everybody for submitting questions. I love getting them. It always makes it entertaining. There are some that are absolutely hilarious, and there are some that I just won't answer because they're about either people I know, or it's just too personal of a question. But I don't mind personal questions. If I can answer it, I will. But we will do definitely Q&As a lot more in the future. I think one every 2 weeks, one every 3 weeks is enough, because I would really like to do like a 2-hour show, and I really would like to do a live show. I think that would be pretty cool too. So that's what we're going to kind of work on. But thanks everybody for submitting questions, and like I said, I appreciate it. Check us out on Twitter at Real Mob Talk 7. Check us out on Facebook at Mob Talk Radio or the True Crime page. Check out our blog at Mob Talk Radio True Crime page blogger. Check me out on YouTube at Mob Talk Radio. Click like, share, subscribe. That's the best thing to do. That's the best thing you can do. If you want to send death threats, harassment, threaten to beat me up and piss on my face, screw my eye sockets out, because I've gotten all of those before. You know where to send those, because they seem to always find their way to me. And try to enjoy your weekend. And we are coming back later on this afternoon with a brand new show, Carmine the Snake Persico. You're not going to want to meet Wow. This is when you know I need to sleep more. You're not going to want to miss the show. Thanks for listening in.